I have the full transcript. Now I'll write the new story using completely new characters, different from Robert, Claire, Marcus, Daniel, already used, and following the exact formula analyzed. At my son's graduation party, my daughter-in-law stood up in front of 60 guests and told me to sign the auto shop over to her husband before I got too old to make that decision. When I looked her in the eye and said, no. She called the county clerk's office right there at the table and started asking about guardianship proceedings. I walked outside, sat in my truck for about 3 minutes, and made a phone call. She went pale when she saw who pulled into my driveway the next morning. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. I never expected that the proudest day of my son's life would be the day I finally understood just how dangerous his wife really was. But that's exactly what happened. The party started the way those things do when you've planned them for months. My son Nathan had just earned his engineering degree at 32, doing it the hard way, night school, while working full days, supporting a wife and 2 kids, studying at the kitchen table after everyone else was asleep. I'd watched him do it for 4 years without a single complaint. When he crossed that stage, I cried harder than I did at his wedding. I'm not ashamed to say it. We held a celebration at the shop, my auto shop. The one I'd built from nothing over 31 years. I'd pushed back the bays, strung lights between the roof beams, rented tables and folding chairs, had my neighbor's wife cater her pulled pork and baked beans. It was exactly the kind of party Nathan would have wanted. Unpretentious, loud, surrounded by people who actually knew him. My daughter-in-law Sasha had other ideas about the venue from the start. She'd wanted a restaurant in the city, something with exposed brick and a curated cocktail menu. I overheard her telling her mother on the phone that celebrating in a garage was embarrassing. I let it go. I'd been letting things go with Sasha for a long time by then. She was charming when they first started dating. That's the word I'd use. Charming in the way that certain people are charming when they need something, all warmth and interest and eye contact. She remembered details. She asked about my back, my blood pressure, whether I was sleeping well. She told Nathan I was the kind of father she'd always wanted. He was so pleased by that. My son has a good heart, and he wanted the 2 most important people in his life to love each other. I tried. For years I tried. For years I tried. But there were things I kept noticing that I couldn't unknot from my mind. It started about 6 months after their wedding. Nathan mentioned over the phone that Sasha had been asking questions about the shop, about whether I had a will, about what the property was worth. He mentioned it casually, the way you mention something that doesn't feel important but sits in your chest a little funny anyway. I didn't say anything. I filed it. Over the next year, the questions came more frequently, routed through Nathan, always framed as concern. Sasha thinks you should have a succession plan. Sasha looked into some tax advantages of early business transfers. Sasha's worried about what happens to the shop if something happens to you, Dad. She just wants to know the family is protected. Sasha had never worked in business. She had a degree in something she rarely used, had stayed home since their first child was born, which was fine. That was their choice. But suddenly, she was an expert on estate planning and small business taxation. I started wondering who was feeding her these ideas. I got my answer when I found out she'd been talking to a man named Derek Folds. Folds ran what he called a business acquisition consultancy out of a strip mall in the next county. He bought struggling small businesses at below-market prices, stripped out the equipment and inventory, then sold or leased the property. I knew his name because one of my guys had previously worked for a shop that Folds had acquired. The shop employed 12 people. Within 8 months of the sale, it was a storage unit facility. I don't know exactly how Sasha connected with Folds, but I know when the dynamic shifted in our family. Right around the same time she started mentioning his name casually, the conversations about the shop became more pointed, less about protecting the family and more about timelines. When was I thinking about retiring? Had I had my cognitive function assessed recently? Nathan mentioned, almost apologetically, that Sasha had read an article about business owners who waited too long to transfer assets and the legal complications that followed. What she was really doing, I understand now, was building a narrative. She was laying the groundwork, slowly and carefully, for a story in which I was an aging man who couldn't be trusted to make good decisions about his own business. She was doing it with patience and precision, a little comment here, a sideways concern there, and she was doing it to my son, the one person whose opinion of me mattered most. I started keeping notes. I wrote down dates and quotes in a small spiral notebook I kept in my truck. I called my attorney, a woman named Beverly Tran, who'd handled my business filings for 18 years. I explained the situation as plainly as I could. Beverly was quiet for a moment, then she said something I won't forget. "Clifford, what you're describing is a pattern, and patterns have destinations." She helped me prepare. We updated my will with language that was specific and airtight. We documented the shop's ownership structure in a way that made any forced transfer legally impossible without my explicit witnessed consent. We also had my physician run a full evaluation, cognitive and physical, and document the results formally. I was 66 years old, fully competent, in excellent health, running a profitable business with 4 employees and a solid customer base. I didn't tell Nathan any of this. I kept hoping he'd see what I was seeing. I kept believing that the son I'd raised, who was honest and sharp and decent, would eventually hear something in Sasha's conversations that didn't sit right. I waited too long. The night of the graduation party, everything I'd been watching for 2 years came out in the open. We were about an hour into the evening. Nathan was at the other end of the shop with his engineering school friends, laughing, relaxed, the way I hadn't seen him in a while. I was standing near the food table talking with a couple of my oldest customers, men who'd been bringing their trucks to me since their own kids were in grade school, when Sasha appeared beside me. She had that look. I can only describe it as organized. Like she'd rehearsed what came next. She set her hand on my arm and said loudly enough for the people around us to hear, "I think now might actually be a perfect time to talk about the future of the shop. We're all together. Everyone who matters is here. It feels like a natural moment." I looked at her. I said quietly, "This is Nathan's night, Sasha. This isn't the time." She didn't lower her voice. "I think it is, actually. Because Nathan deserves to know that his future is secure. And we've all been waiting for you to make a decision about what happens to this place." The conversations nearby went quiet. Not all at once, but in that ripple effect you get when people sense something is shifting. I said, "The shop is mine. The decision about what happens to it is mine. And this conversation can wait." That's when she did something I hadn't expected. She pulled out her phone. Right there at the party, in front of my neighbors and customers and my son's friends, she opened the browser and started reading aloud from a county website about guardianship petitions. Her voice was calm. She explained to the people standing around us that there were legal mechanisms available to families when an elderly relative was making decisions that put assets at risk. I was not making decisions that put anything at risk. I was refusing to hand my business over to someone I didn't trust. But she'd framed those two things as identical, and she'd been framing them that way to Nathan for 2 years. I looked across the shop. Nathan had heard the commotion. He was walking toward us, his expression confused, the way it always got when Sasha and I were in conflict. He trusted her. He loved her. He wanted to believe the best. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at my son and I said, "I love you. Tonight is your night. I'm going to step out for a few minutes." And I walked through the side door into the parking lot. I sat in my truck for exactly 3 minutes. Then I made a phone call. The man I called was named Howard Briggs. Howard and I had known each other for 22 years. We'd met through a small business owners association in the early 2000s and had stayed in regular contact ever since. What most people didn't know about Howard was what he did before he semi-retired at 55. Howard Briggs had spent 23 years as a special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. He'd investigated fraud, asset stripping, elder financial exploitation. He knew every version of the play Sasha and Derek Folds were running. I'd called Howard 3 months earlier and laid out everything I'd observed. He'd listened without interrupting, then told me he had some contacts who'd be very interested in the name Derek Folds. Folds had apparently been on the periphery of a broader investigation for some time. When I called from the parking lot, I just said, "Howard, it's happened. She made her move publicly. I think it's time to finish this." He said, "I'll be there tomorrow morning at 9. Get some sleep." I went back inside. I found Nathan and told him I wasn't feeling well, kissed him on the head the way I had when he was small, and drove home. I didn't sleep much. I lay awake thinking about my son, about how much he loved his wife, about how the truth I was about to show him was going to break something that couldn't be put back together exactly the way it was. That was the part that cost me, not Sasha, not the shop, not the public humiliation of her performance at the party. It was the look I knew I was going to see on Nathan's face when he understood what had been happening in his own marriage. Howard arrived at 9 in the morning, exactly as promised. He wasn't alone. He brought a woman named Patricia Ellsworth, a licensed forensic accountant, and a man named James Croft who worked in the county district attorney's economic crimes unit. They sat at my kitchen table and spread out documents. Howard had spent 3 months quietly building a picture of Sasha's arrangement with Derek Folds. What they found was thorough and ugly. Folds had approached Sasha approximately 18 months earlier through a mutual contact. He'd identified the shop as a promising acquisition based on its property value, the land it sat on having appreciated significantly as the area developed. He proposed an arrangement where Sasha would facilitate a transfer of the business to her and Nathan, after which she would sell to Folds' company at a negotiated price. In exchange, Folds would pay Sasha a flat fee of $30,000 and absorb the couple's existing debt, which Patricia Ellsworth had calculated at close to $65,000 in credit cards, personal loans, and a refinanced car. Nathan didn't know about any of the debt. Sasha had hidden it carefully using accounts he wasn't monitoring. Croft, the DA's investigator, was direct about the legal picture. What Sasha and Folds had been doing constituted a conspiracy to commit elder financial fraud. The guardianship angle, using the threat of a legal competency proceeding to pressure me into a business transfer, was textbook financial exploitation of a senior adult under Texas law. The fact that she'd done it publicly, in front of witnesses, was not a mistake on her part. It was a calculated pressure tactic. It also happened to be a significant piece of evidence. Several of my customers at the party had already called me that morning asking if I was all right. Howard asked if I'd be willing to have them provide written statements. I said yes. At 11 o'clock, I called Nathan. I asked him to come to the shop. Just him, and told him I needed to show him something important. He heard something in my voice and didn't ask questions. He arrived 20 minutes later. Sasha wasn't with him. I sat him down in my office, the same office where I'd helped him with his homework at this same desk when he was 9 years old, and I told him everything. I started from the beginning. The questions about the shop, the note-keeping, Beverly Tran and the legal preparations, Howard Briggs and what he'd found, Derek Folds and the arrangements Sasha had made. Nathan didn't speak for a long time when I finished. He sat very still with his hands flat on the desk in front of him, and I watched him process what it meant to learn that his wife had been lying to him and working against his father at the same time. Finally, he said, "The debt. She told me we were fine." "I know." "Dad, she told me you were losing it." that you were making erratic decisions about the shop, that you were forgetting things. He looked up at me and his eyes were wet. I started believing her. I started watching you differently. I know that too. I should have talked to you. I should have talked to you. I should have just asked you directly instead of Nathan. I reached across the desk and put my hand over his. She's very good at this. She had years of practice before she met us. Croft had mentioned that this wasn't Sasha's first attempt at something like this. Her previous serious relationship, before Nathan, had ended when the man's family discovered she'd been attempting to access his mother's property records without authorization. Nothing had been provable enough to prosecute then. This time it was different. That afternoon, Howard, Croft, and Beverly Tran sat down with Sasha at a neutral location. Nathan came with them but didn't speak during the meeting. He told me afterward that he sat in the corner and watched his wife's face move through denial, deflection, and finally a stunned recognition that the people across the table knew more than she'd imagined anyone could. The agreement Croft's office put in front of her was structured to give her a choice. She could cooperate fully with the investigation into Fold's operation, which was broader than just our situation, provide testimony and documentation, and accept a civil resolution that protected Nathan and the children from the fallout of her actions. Or she could take her chances with a criminal prosecution. She cooperated. Derek Folds was indicted 4 months later on multiple counts of conspiracy to commit financial fraud. He'd done versions of the same scheme with 4 other families in 2 states. Sasha's testimony was a significant part of what made the case. The marriage didn't survive it. Nathan told me about 6 weeks after everything came out that he'd hired an attorney. He was heartbroken, and I won't pretend otherwise. He loved her. He'd built his adult life around her. Watching my son grieve, that was harder than anything Sasha had done to me directly. I would have traded the whole situation, the shop, the land, every dollar of it, to give him back the marriage he thought he had. But he couldn't have that marriage, because it had never existed the way he believed it had. He moved into my place for a while. We ate a lot of dinner together at that kitchen table. He helped me in the shop on weekends. I watched him slowly come back to himself. The quiet humor, the steadiness, the particular focus he'd always had that reminded me so much of his mother. Nathan got primary custody of the kids. That part was not simple and not fast, but it happened. Sasha relocated to another city. The contact between them became formal and logistical, the way it has to be when children are involved and trust has been completely destroyed. About 8 months after the graduation party, Nathan and I were locking up the shop one evening when he stopped and looked around at the place, at the lift racks and the toolboxes and the wall of parts he'd helped me organize when he was 12 years old. He said, "I've been thinking about what happens to this place eventually." I waited. "I'd like to learn the business side, not to take it over before you're ready. Not because of any pressure or timeline, just because I want to know it. I want my kids to know it." I handed him the spare key ring that had been hanging by the door for 20 years. He looked down at it, then up at me, and I saw in his face the same kid who used to fall asleep in the waiting room while I finished a job, curled up across 3 plastic chairs with his coat as a pillow. "This place has been ours for 31 years, I said. "It's going to stay ours." We walked out into the parking lot, and the evening air was warm, and somewhere down the street someone had their radio on loud enough to carry. Nathan locked the gate behind us, and I thought about everything that had been taken from him, and what had been given back, and about how the truth, even when it costs you everything, is the only thing that actually holds. Some people mistake patience for weakness. Sasha did. Derek Folds did. They looked at a 66-year-old man running an auto shop and saw something easy to take. They didn't see 31 years of showing up, or a son worth protecting, or the kind of slow, quiet certainty that doesn't flinch when it's finally time to act. "I'd like to know what you would have done in my place." Have you ever watched someone you love being manipulated right in front of you? Drop your city in the comments below. I read every single one. And I've put 2 more stories on the end screen that I think you'll want to hear next. Thank you for staying with me until here. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened, and the more I sit with it, the more I believe that what Sasha and Folds were running wasn't just a scheme. It was a bet. They looked at a man my age, running an auto shop, living alone, and they calculated that I wouldn't fight back hard enough, fast enough, or smart enough to stop them. That's the part that stays with me. Not the anger of it, the cold arithmetic of it. And here's what I keep coming back to. They were wrong not because I got lucky, but because I paid attention. For 2 years I paid attention when it would have been easier to dismiss what I was seeing. Every uncomfortable conversation I filed away. Every small lie I wrote down. Every pattern I tracked quietly in a spiraled notebook in my truck. That didn't happen by accident. It happened 'cause I made a choice early on to take what I was observing seriously, even when I had no proof and no audience and no one telling me I was right to be concerned. There's something about staying calm when you're being threatened that most people underestimate. Not calm because you're passive, calm because you're thinking. Sasha expected me to react with emotion at that party, to argue with her in front of 60 people, to lose my composure and hand her exactly the narrative she'd been building. When I walked out instead, quietly, without a word of anger, I think it genuinely confused her. She'd planned for a fight. She hadn't planned for patience. Nathan asked me once, months after everything had settled, how I'd managed to not fall apart during those 2 years of watching it unfold. I told him the truth. I did fall apart, just privately. There were nights I sat in that shop after everyone had gone home and felt the specific loneliness of knowing something you can't yet prove, of watching your son look at you differently because of words his wife had put in his ear. That's a particular kind of pain. It doesn't have a clean name, but feeling it didn't mean acting on it before I was ready. What I understand now that I didn't fully understand then is that the people who try to take things from you are almost always counting on your silence or your panic. They need you either too ashamed to speak or too reactive to think clearly. The way through that is neither. It's documentation. It's counsel. It's building something airtight before you move. Howard Briggs didn't show up out of nowhere. He showed up because I'd spent 3 months laying out every piece of what I knew and giving him something real to work with. I think about Nathan a lot, about what it cost him. He's rebuilding now, slowly, and I watch him with his kids on weekends, and I see the steadiness coming back into him. He didn't deserve what Sasha put him through, and no amount of justice in the courts gives him back the years he spent inside a marriage that was built on a lie from the start. That's the part that doesn't resolve cleanly. Some things just cost what they cost. But I'll tell you what I do believe, and it's not complicated. People who build their lives by taking from others eventually run out of people to take from. Folds had done this 4 times before us. 4 families. And each time he walked away clean. Because no one had connected the thread yet. The thread gets connected eventually. It always does. Not because the universe arranges it. Because people like Howard exist, and people like Beverly Tran exist, and because the record of what someone has done follows them whether they're paying attention to it or not. I'm 66 years old. I've worked 31 years on that shop. I hand Nathan a key, and I think about what it actually means to leave something to the person who deserves it on your own terms, in your own time, because you chose to, and not because someone pressured you into it. That's the only kind of legacy worth passing on.